It's Sean Mills with Hack My Homestead, and today is actually my first podcast that I'm recording live and streaming. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stream this to Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, and then I'll strip the audio out of it and post it to the podcast RSS feed. Today is July 12th, 2023. Yeah, so day 12 of being self employed. And today I want to do a little bit of a discussion on generators and how we use them on the off grid homestead. I did a podcast earlier today with Jack Spirko over at the Survival Podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the video notes here. But I got to thinking about, the podcast with him was how do we actually choose the right generator for our application, for the specific application that we have. And I thought that it would be a good idea to do a follow-up on my own podcast and talk about specifically how we use a generator off-grid. So let me go back to the beginning. When we first went off-grid back in 2012, all we had was a generator. And so 100% of our power that we needed for the house was literally crank the generator, and then we used what power we could from the generator. Then we added an inverter and a battery bank. And the inverter was an inverter charger, which meant it could take the AC input from the generator and actually charge our battery bank up while it was powering the house. Then when the generator was off, the transfer switch would kick over and it would actually invert the power from the battery bank, and we'd use that in the house. And so that was kind of like the whole idea, and it worked great. We did that until we could afford to buy solar panels and add those to the system along with the charge controller and a mount and all the other things that go along with that. And so what that allowed us to do was to keep the batteries pretty well topped off with solar power. And then we only needed to use generators for our well pump. So at the time we had a deep well pump, 3 horsepower, so pretty big one. And our inverter just could not, actually the inverter could handle the draw for the well pump, but our battery bank couldn't. It was just too many amps to draw out at one time. It would create a big voltage drop, and then the inverter would say, okay, that's too much of a voltage drop. We're going to cut ourselves off. So we would use the generator when we needed to fill up the pressure tank, which we added a pressure tank to our system, and that worked fine for a while. But the goal was to really go away from that deep well pump. And so that's what we did. We installed a rainwater catchment system, and we installed a smaller 1/10 horsepower pump. And that pump then pressurized the house, provided all of our regular water needs. And we still had the deep well plumbed into the system. So in the event that we had, sort of drought conditions, we could always go back to that generator to deep well pump. Now we weren't pressurizing the water though. The deep well pump just had to put water into the cistern. And then of course from there we would use the 1/10 horsepower pump. So even then when the inverter was on, or rather when the deep well pump was on, it did not tax the generator like it normally would have. And at that point we could have used our battery bank for the amount of draw that the deep well pump needed. But it was one of those things where it's like, why draw all this extra power from the battery bank and do it quickly? And as I've said before, for flooded lead acid batteries, which is what we started with, you don't want to draw those. You don't want to draw those batteries down too much, right? You want to be able to have a nice level drawdown. And so we used the generator because it allowed us to fill up the cistern from the deep well without having to really tax our flooded lead acid batteries. And so then over time, as the batteries got worse, we found that we needed to equalize more, and we used the actual generator to do the equalization. So 5 years in, we were running an equalization charge about once a month, and we were still working with batteries that weren't doing that great. But we made them last for 7 years before we replaced them the first time. And when we replaced them, we actually replaced them with a smaller battery bank, knowing that we would kill those batteries faster, because we also knew that the next battery bank would be a flooded lead, or rather a lithium iron phosphate battery. So we weren't living there at the time. We were living here in Alabama when we put that phase 2 system in. And like I said, the goal was always, that was a stopgap until we went to the lithium iron phosphate technology, which is where we are now. We still don't have the full solar array built out. We're literally in the process of moving back to Tennessee and getting that system set up the way that we want it. So we've got about 1,200 watts. No, we've got about 1,600 watts of solar in right now. And that's just kind of so slowly charging that system up so that when we're back and forth, we've got a relatively topped off battery bank. But that system is going to grow to about 9,000 watts altogether. We just haven't gotten that in yet. So one of the things that we have to do is run the generator. And so right now we've got the generator running with a charge inverter, which you can get from Signature Solar. And that charge inverter charges the batteries at the voltage and amperage that we select, specifically dialed in for that battery bank. And that way we can actually dial the charge to the generator, to the battery bank, etc. And I really like that system. It's about $400, but it works so well. And if you've got a 48 volt battery system, it's healthier for your inverter to charge those batteries from the generator through the charge inverter versus the generator straight into the inverter. So you're always going to save doing it that way. So let's talk a little bit about the history of generators and kind of where we are now. So we started off with I didn't even remember. I think it was a Briggs & Stratton generator. It's probably 8 years old by the time we got a hold of it. And that thing lasted for about a year and a half. And after a year and a half, it blew out, blew an O-ring. And so we went to Harbor Freight and picked up a Predator 8750. And I still have that generator today. So that generator went in 2014. It did all of that battery charging duty cycle that I just mentioned. And it's still today, or rather not today, but day before yesterday, it was literally on charging batteries. So you've got to make sure that you maintain those generators. I'll talk a little bit here in a moment about, how we go about maintaining those. But when you're off grid, you can't go out to get the generator and get it going and it not work. So we've got that 8750 that we started with. We also have a Generac 5,000 watt inverter. And oddly enough, the deep well pump, the 3 horsepower deep well pump, actually ran on the Generac better than it did on the Predator. The Generac was rated for 5,000 watts. The Predator is rated for 7,000 8750 surge. And it did better on the Generac. So that was interesting. We actually got that from my sister-in-law. They lived in, let's see, where did they live at the time? I think they lived in Virginia, right outside of DC. And they bought this generator and then went to move because her husband had a new job and they didn't want to take the generator with them. I think they were moving into a house with a whole house generator. And so they literally gave it to us. It was great. Got a $400 or $500 Generac generator for free. I also have a 4,000 watt Briggs & Stratton inverter generator. So if I'm running anything that's going to be below 50% of the demand of my bigger generators, then I'll go with that inverter generator. If I only need to run about 1,000 watts, then I'm going to go with the inverter generator because it's bad for your generator to actually run them below 50% of the rated capacity. They burn fuel inefficiently. That creates more buildup inside the moving components of the engine, and it's just not good for it. So if I've got something that's 2,500 watts or more that I'm going to be drawing for at least 30 minutes, I'll go to that Generac. If I'm in closer to the 5,000 range where that Generac's going to get taxed, I'll go to the Predator. And when I've got something that's kind of below that 2,000 or below 2,500, then I'm going to use that Briggs & Stratton inverter generator. I also have a small 1,200 watts. I think it's a Champion, whatever. Let's see, was that Harbor Freight? I'm trying to remember if that was Harbor Freight or if that was, I think it was Harbor Freight. Whatever Harbor Freight's green cheapo inverter generator is, I think I bought it for $150. and that thing rarely ever gets used. But in the event that I just needed to charge up some batteries for tools or something like that, that would be a great option. We actually used to have a shed. We called it the shed with the bed because it was kind of like our guest suite, which was just a big open shed with a bed in it. And so we would put that generator out there so that any guests that were staying overnight could run fans or, whatever the case may be, charge their phones and stuff like that. So those are generators. And now I saw a deal today on I think it was a 4,500 watt dual fuel inverter generator. So propane or gas, and it was an inverter generator for $533. It was a Prime Day deal. If I didn't already have too many generators, then I would probably get that thing. But I know my wife would kill me if I came home with another generator. But man, that thing it's $1,000 generator all day long, except for today where it's $533. So if you're listening to this before the end of the day on the 12th of July and you need a dual fuel inverter generator, go check that out. The Champion. It's epic. That price is epic. But yeah, so I've got a small generator for small loads. I've got a couple medium-sized generators for medium loads. One of those is an inverter generator, so I can use it for small loads as well. And then I've got the big boy, the 8750. And, that thing is it's a rock star. What I do is I put stable in my stored fuel, and then about every month I'll run an ounce of seafoam in the gas tank. And that just keeps everything nice and clean. So the stable helps prevent any water issues related to the ethanol gas, and the seafoam keeps everything inside the engine working really well. Have heard of some people adding seafoam to the oil. I have never done that. I try to keep the oil changed pretty regularly, but I might have to check that out because obviously most of the time with an engine, it's going to be your crankcase. With a generator engine, it's going to be your crankcase where your problems are going to start, and then they just grow out from there. So really quickly, how a generator works. Just imagine a thing that isn't spinning called a stator and a thing that is spinning called a rotor. So one stays and one rolls. Those two things together create an electromagnetic field. And the reason why we use copper in those windings is because copper has free electrons, and free electrons can therefore those are charged atoms, and those can actually be relatively easily converted into an electrical charge when a magnetic field is introduced. So that's the reason why all of those are copper, and that's kind of how those work. And so in a regular generator, you have to maintain a constant RPM so that your voltage and your frequency is constant. Okay, so in the US for alternating current, you need 60 hertz, and I think most of the rest of the world it's 50 hertz. I don't know. I know in the US it's 60, so we'll stick there. And I know in Australia and China it's 50. So in order to maintain that, you have to have a set voltage, or rather a set RPMs for your generator to run at. And so what happens is when you increase the load or you increase the internal current being given by the electromagnet, the generator actually has to turn harder, so more torque to get that rotor to continue to turn. And so that's why your generator makes a noise when it gets more fuel and the engine's working harder to keep that same amount of RPMs. Whereas an inverter generator, what it does is converts the AC from your alternator to DC and then converts it back to AC. And why that is good is the conversion from DC back to AC takes care of the hertz, the 60 hertz, and the 120 or 240 volt that you have to have. And so when you have those two things taken care of, well, now the engine can literally spin at whatever RPMs are necessary to produce the wattage needed. Okay, so they're much more efficient. They're much more efficient when it comes to smaller loads or loads below 50%. And that's also why they're quieter, because literally they're only spinning enough to create the wattage required versus having to maintain a specific like 3,600 RPMs, regardless of how much resistance, internal resistance is there. So that's kind of how that works. Now, like I said, off grid, we use the inverter generator for the small loads. We have kind of the backup 1,200 watt generator that rarely gets used, but that would be a good one to throw in the bed of a truck if I'm going to go out into the woods and I'm going to do some chainsaw work. But I also want to take my little handheld pruning tool to knock some of the small stuff out, or to help take some smaller limbs off of trees without having that lug around my heavy steel chainsaw. In that scenario, I could literally take that little small generator, take an extra battery pack, take a charger with me, and I could crank that thing up, maybe have some music going or something. And so, those are options. Most of the time, I'll take the battery that's in the device and I'll take one extra battery. And by the time I've gone through those two full 4 amp hour batteries, I'm done. So I don't have to do that too often, but that would be an example. Maybe if you had multiple people out there working together and you're running through batteries faster, or you could even use that to run an electric chainsaw, like a plug-in chainsaw. I don't have one of those, but that would be another option for taking one of those smaller inverters out to the field, because the 1,200 one I can, tote around. It's not heavy at all. The 5,000 watt and the 4,500 watt inverter generator, and of course the 8750 are all very heavy. I've got a friend in Tennessee that's got a 10,000 watt generator. I want to say it's a Westinghouse, and that thing's every bit of 200 pounds. It is a monster. And so you don't want to be lugging those things around if you don't have to. And I bet the 8750 that I have is 115, 120 pounds, something like that. So those are the things that we use the generator on the Homestead. We have not run that well pump in years, just because we have enough water stored from the rainwater catchment. And I've been reading recently that that's potentially bad for the pump, because you can have a bunch of sediment settle down around the actual pump housing. So once we get settled back in Tennessee, I'm going to check into that, and we might have to replace that well pump, because I don't want to be reliant on just the rainwater catchment. Now, that being said, we live close to a river and a pretty big creek, and I've got IBC totes and a flatbed. So I could literally strap a IBC tote down to my flatbed and drive it down there, pump water straight from the creek into the IBC and tote it back up to the house if I had to. So there's no way I'm not going to be able to get water, but I really don't want to have to leave the homestead to get water. You know what I mean? So I think that checking out that deep well pump and probably getting that thing on a generator to see if it still runs, or potentially changing it out for a solar powered deep well pump. How about that? Speaking of, you might be surprised to find that we only have 2 days left on the Kickstarter. That's right. We close funding on the 14th, and we are over 10,000. So we've hit 2 stretch goals. We've got 2 to go. We're getting close to $11,000. $12,000 is where we add the air pumps, and $13,000 is where you get access to Paul Wheaton's Pond series. And so it's really a good thing. Now, Paul and I don't agree 100% on pond liners. I don't have a problem using a pond liner, but his pond workshop is a really, really good tool for people that might be considering putting ponds in on their property. And they really go into, if you're not going to use a pond liner, or if you're diametrically opposed to them the way that Paul is, how to go about actually developing that using the clay on your own property. So that's a tremendous resource. As a reminder, at $70 and above, not only do you get access to the documentary, all of the digital assets, which is the white paper, you get invited to the private YouTube live streaming events that we're going to do. You get all of the goodies. You get access to Nicole Sauce's Homestead Smart Planning webinar, and the how to make your Garden Productive in Year One webinar. Those two things are worth their weight in gold. But at $70, you get access to all of that stuff, plus the movie streamed or downloaded. If you're in the U.S., you also get a copy, a thumb drive copy mailed to you. If you're outside of the U.S., I'm not mailing things internationally, so there is another option at $70 for you to pledge to back the Kickstarter without having to, put in the money for the shipping and all that stuff. Or I don't even know how that works because I've got it set up to where you can only ship to the U.S. So if your address was outside of the U.S., I don't even know if you could check out. But yeah, so those are there and available. And like I said, you got 2 days to go. You will not be able to get this outside of the Kickstarter. Okay. I am going to honor my Kickstarter backers by only ever providing this documentary to them. I will never sell this separately. I will never add this as a, go to my website and put in $30 and buy this DVD. Not going to do it. It will never be sold outside of this Kickstarter event. So if you're interested in this, then go to Kickstarter.com, look up solar water pumping, and you can back there through Friday. Friday is it. So just as a reminder, in addition to the base program where we're testing different panels, different linear current boosters, different pumps, we are also now adding a segment on ram pumps. So everything you ever wanted to know about air pumps, or rather ram pumps, as well as we're going to test a Dankoff solar slow pump, which is over $1,000 pump. We're adding it to the test so that we can see how the cheap pumps compare to the big pumps. And the other thing that we're going to do is we are going to, getting ahead of myself. If we get to $12,000 funding, then I will also bring in air pumps, and we'll do 2 segments on air pumps. One, how does an air pump work and what kind of flow, what kind of options do we have? And then the second one is how an air pump with a DC charger, both running off the same solar panel, how does that impact the flow rates and or the lift? And so we'll see how that works. And then, like I said, at $13,000, everyone at $70 or above also gets access to Paul's pond video from his World Domination Gardening series. So tons of value there, guys. If you don't want to pledge at the $70 level, $25 gets you access to stream and to download the movie. And so I would say that if that's something that you're interested in, if you think that there's value there to back, and if you know of anyone else that would be interested in this and will be mad at you for not letting them know about it within the next 2 days, because again, this is the only way they're going to be able to get it, then I would recommend sending them the link as well. So I think I'm going to wrap up. One other thing I wanted to mention to everyone. My first ebook is live. If you go to hackmyhomestead.com, at the very top, you've got my little disclaimer about being an Amazon affiliate, as well as my affiliate links to Santan Solar and Signature Solar and EMP Shield. And there is also now a new link there for my ebook. And the ebook is what you need to know to evaluate your property for solar PV potential. So if you've got a property you either own or are looking at buying, or you've got a bunch of sales guys coming by wanting to talk to you about solar panels, this tells you everything you need to know to evaluate your own property to figure out how much solar production can I get. The cost is $14.95. Like I said, go to the website and you can get the link. Also at the website, you can sign up for the newsletter. Just hit the contact page. There's a place for you to sign up for the newsletter about halfway down. And I send that out on a monthly basis. Just let everyone know, hey, here's what's going on in the industry. There's no cost to it, but it tells you, what things cost, what places have deals, if there's any big deals going on right now, and anything that I'm seeing that's coming up in the industry. So if someone's telling me, hey, lithium is drying up, and by the end of the year, you're not going to be able to get lithium iron phosphate batteries for less than $2,000 a piece. That's the kind of information that I put in the newsletter. So with that being said, I'll wrap it up. If you guys have any questions or things you want me to cover on the podcast, you can email me, Shawn, SHAWN, at hackmyhomestead.com, and we'll talk to you next time.